Unfortunately, for some of you, I will not be asking your favorite Jay-Z song, as I just saw a few minutes ago on another nationally sports show. But we will talk a lot of Notre Dame football for the next hour here and get you set for the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State. And, of course, huge offseason of recruiting and transfers here. We've got Nathan Erbach on the top there from the Golden Homers podcast. Nathan also hosts our post-game show, Notre Dame, and along with Ben Belden. We got Nick Shipkowski from the USA Today platform for Notre Dame football, Fighting Irish Wire. Guys, how are we doing today?
Doing all right, Mark.
Great,
Excellent.
Mark. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, hey, thank you for jumping on to talk some football. Hope you had a nice Christmas and on through the holiday season.
Yeah, no, some fun times. I know we were talking a little bit before this about some stuff that went on.
Times, fun in quotes maybe, but we won't let Nathan elaborate. But it's just that everything's all is well. That's good. So everybody had fun. The kids survived. So yes. That's most important. So Notre Dame takes on Oklahoma State. I'll just start out, Nick, with the general assessment of the fan base, the level of excitement and interest in this game.
I think, it skyrockets as soon as everything that went down at the end of November and start of November. I think that there's an energy around this. And when Brian Kelly abruptly left on that Monday evening, and it was like Notre Dame got dealt just a terrible hand. And you wondered, what is the future of this program? What coaches are going to stay? In turn, a team that's recruited pretty well here in recent years, has had an uptick in recruiting in recent years, and is on the verge of really having an uptick in recruiting in the coming years. You wondered who's going to transfer out, what's going to happen here, what does the future of this program look like in as little as 6 months, 7 months from now, let alone 2 years, 3 years from now. And everything came together about as perfectly as it possibly could in terms of keeping the current roster intact, keeping the future commitments intact, wrapping up this past recruiting class at just the early signing period just coming in just right now. That went incredibly well. And I think that Marcus Freeman, any Notre Dame fan that follows this team, Brian Kelly's a darn good football coach. He took this team from a place where it was really struggling, obviously, back in 2009 when Charlie Weiss was fired, and he turned them back into a national contender. Did Brian Kelly take them as far as they possibly could have gone? Probably so, under Brian Kelly's watch. But the excitement that's now there, I think that's under Marcus Freeman, you haven't seen that in quite some time. The energy of the 35-year-old, going to be turned 36 here at the start of January. But the energy of him, I think, is very contagious, both to the team around him, the coaching staff around him, but also the fan base. I've seen this energy of this fan base not like this in years. I don't know, Nathan, if you agree, but it's been a long stinking time since I've seen Notre Dame fans this excited about the future of anything.
Yeah, no, I echo a lot of what you just said. I think with Brian Kelly, if he was still the head coach at Notre Dame, there would be some excitement overall. I think with the idea that Notre Dame was still sort of kind of on the outside looking in, and they didn't really feel like they were robbed of a playoff berth like some teams do when they are the 5 seed. That probably would have helped a little bit. And obviously the idea that Notre Dame hasn't won a New Year's Six Bowl in a long time as well. I think that kind of would excite the fan base, but with Freeman in and, and just, I think every Notre Dame fan essentially wanted Marcus Freeman. If it wasn't him, it had to be someone like maybe not even Luke Fickell. Honestly, I think people were excited about the idea of someone like Luke Fickell, but it would have had to have been a really splash hire, just with all the rumors and different things that were going down, after Kelly left. So there's definitely kind of like this resurgence of the fan base. Certainly in recruiting, but for this New Year's Six Bowl as well. And it would kind of be ironic if Marcus Freeman's first win was was a New Year's Six Bowl when Notre Dame hasn't won one in a long time, and Kelly wasn't able to get to that feat. And obviously, certainly Kelly deserves a lot of credit if Notre Dame does win this game as well. It still kind of is his team to an extent, but it would certainly be interesting because his first 2 games in a Notre Dame as the Notre Dame head coach will be New Year's Six Bowl against Oklahoma State, and then at the Shoe, not only his former alma mater, but obviously a really terrific team in general.
Now, I don't know that anyone can take anything away from Marcus Freeman winning the Fiesta Bowl. Certainly, Oklahoma State's a quality opponent. They're probably one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the country, something in that range. Certainly a top 10 to 12 team in the country. So it's a significant win. It's against a good team. I don't know that Marcus Freeman would be up against the type teams that Brian Kelly has been up against in that New Year's Six / BCS run. So it's not quite the status of team, and that's not Marcus Freeman's issue. He's got a difficult team to take on in a couple days. Is it going to be difficult, Nathan, at all to watch the college football playoff with Cincinnati involved? Because I've talked to different people from the Notre Dame perspective. Some see that Cincinnati game as we were right there, we could have won. Others as, sure, we could have won, but they came in, they posted a solid win. They were the better team on that day, clearly. And so it is what it is. And we moved on from there because we had our shot and didn't get it done.
I mean, not really for me. I think I sort of agree with both of those ideas. I mean, I think overall Notre Dame's probably a better football team than Cincinnati, and specifically how they played in the second half of the season. I think a rematch would have been fun, and I probably would have predicted Notre Dame win. But on that day, Cincinnati was clearly the better football team. Notre Dame wasn't what they were. That's not an excuse by any means. It's just, I think it's factual. Teams can grow and get better as the season goes on, just like they can get worse as the season goes on, possibly. So, but no, I mean, I think Cincinnati deserved to be in over Notre Dame because of that win and the fact that they went undefeated. And I think the other 3 football teams that were in as well probably deserve to be in over Notre Dame as with that said. So no, it's not going to be too weird. It's kind of like what I mentioned in my previous comment. Like, a lot of the times when you're the number 5 team in the country, according to the College Football Playoff Committee, you almost feel slighted. It seems like every year the team that finishes 5, maybe even 6, feels somewhat slighted that they didn't get in. And I don't think Notre Dame fans felt that way. We all knew going into championship week what had to be done. It started out really, really nice when Baylor beat Oklahoma State, and you pretty much just needed Georgia at that point to beat Alabama and continue their undefeated season. And then obviously if Iowa would have beat Michigan, and that would have been, that probably would have catapulted Notre Dame as well. So because of all that, I mean, I don't really feel slighted by it. I think Notre Dame probably got what they deserved in regards to where they're at. So no, I'm not going to be really looking on December 31st in that way. Just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's take care of business against Cincinnati. I do wonder, part of me wonders if the first drive, the opening drive against Cincinnati goes differently. Notre Dame marches the ball right downfield to get in a goal-to-go situation. Jack Cohn, done a lot of really good things this year. That's his biggest mistake of the season, is that he panics under pressure, throws an interception in the end zone. And even though Notre Dame forced, I think it was a 3-and-out, or got the ball right back right away, it felt like they were trailing the rest of that day, even though it was a while before they gave up points, actually, because it was like, okay, well, there's at least 3 points, possibly 7 points that are off the board right away. And it felt like they were down. And I just wonder, I mean, hey, if that outcome is anything different, even if it's a 3-0 lead there at the start of that game, how differently does it go? But if it's in nuts where candies and nuts, every day would be Christmas, right? So instead, you're playing in the Fiesta Bowl. You have a chance to win. I mean, it's a big time opportunity. I know that bowl games aren't the same if they're not in the college football playoff as they were even a few short years ago. And I still think that you look at this, and kind of like Nathan and I were just discussing there, you look at the energy around this, and it's been this Notre Dame thing of, okay, well, if it's not the college football playoff, or it's not a huge bowl game, is there as much? I mean, there was some talk of that with the Camping World Bowl a few years ago against Iowa State, of what team's going to show up. It's, yeah, it's not where they want to be. It's not the major bowl they want to be in. They showed up and they played great that day. This is one that I think that the energy is there, and I think that it really is in terms of as big as a bowl game that doesn't have national title implications can get for Notre Dame. It really feels like it's at least that, if that makes if that makes sense whatsoever.
And it's the only time that we've had that direct comparison to be able to say, okay, there was a head-to-head matchup between the two teams that are vying for this position. So it's pretty easy to see. And Cincinnati didn't lose another game, which would have brought their schedule even more into question, because there's no comparison between the two schedules, 1 through 12, games 1 through 12. Cincinnati's just doesn't stack up, but they did not lose a game. Notre Dame lost the game, and it was head-to-head to Cincinnati at home. We haven't had that kind of comparison between 4 and 5 in the other 7 college football playoff seasons. We got Nathan Erbach on the line. We got Nick Shipkowski on the line as well. You can catch Nick's work at Fighting Irish Wire on the USA Today platform for Notre Dame football. And also Nathan's got his podcast, Golden Homers, and hosts our post-game here at the Voice of College Football on our Notre Dame network. And we will also simulcast that. And so Nathan will have post-game, I believe, with Ben. I guess you guys are ready to roll on New Year's Day.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think we are.
Excellent. And so let's get to the personnel on the field for this game. Kyle Hamilton is the consensus All-American exceptional safety. Right out of the gate against Florida State, he showed his worth. And then on through the season, for anyone who watched that game, watched the Wisconsin game, I can think of amazing plays that he made in that game against the Badgers. Kyron Williams, top running back for the last few seasons, he's not going to play. So, Nathan, where do we stand in regards to those two guys and their replacements?
Well, with Kyle Hamilton, it's a little less murky. I mean, he's been out since, I think, he got hurt during the USC game. So it's been about 6 or so weeks since he's even played in a Notre Dame uniform. And it was pretty much known that if they didn't make the college football playoff, that he was probably going to be an opt-out, just with him being a likely top 5, top 10 pick. So Notre Dame has kind of had their safeties under control for a while, and they've actually developed pretty nicely over the last, like 5 to 6 weeks. A converted wide receiver, Xavier Watts, and then also Ramon Henderson, who moved over from like slot corner to safety. Those two guys are going to control probably the free safety spot for Notre Dame. I think that's the 2 deep there. And then you have Houston Griffith and DJ Brown, who have been in the Notre Dame program for several years now. And Brown and Griffith have kind of traded off as starting safeties this year, depending on the team and the matchup and stuff like that. So I think that technically the listed starters are Ramon Henderson and Houston Griffith on the depth chart. But you're going to see plenty of Xavier Watts and plenty of DJ Brown. So Chris O'Leary, the first-time safeties coach for Notre Dame, I think has done a really, really good job getting that stabilized with the injury to Kyle Hamilton, and then obviously now with the opt-out of Kyle Hamilton. At running back, it's not really too murky either. I mean, Logan Diggs is a true freshman who's gotten a decent amount of playing time this year and has done well with that playing time. He's sort of taken over the number 2 the number 2 running back role with Chris Tyree being injured at times this year. Sibo Flemister, I don't know if he was really suspended or if he got hurt or whatever it was, but he hasn't really played for Notre Dame a whole lot. And so Logan Diggs looks like he's the future number 1, moving forward, and a really, really good running back at that. Showed a lot of promise. But then Chris Tyree's a home run threat, can play the slot as well. So you're probably looking at those 2 guys and maybe a little bit of another true freshman in Audric Estime. Might get some playing time in the bowl game as well, and certainly moving forward next year and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and I think that it's Fiesta Bowl or not playing on this. Just a tip of the cap to Kyle Hamilton and Kyron Williams, because they might not have national titles next to their name ultimately on their resumes of what they did in Notre Dame uniforms. But I'll be damned if you don't look at the running backs of Notre Dame the last really You can put Julius Jones in that conversation, and then you're going all the way back. And I know that Autry Denson's the all-time leading rusher in Notre Dame history, but you're going back all the way to the days of Jerome Bettis and Reggie Brooks, since you saw a running back that was as capable and as good as Kyron Williams. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not going to blaze with a 40 time necessarily. But I mean, it's like watching a gymnast run is what it is with him. It's his balance is so incredible. And it's just, you think that there's so many different times that, okay, he's going down here, he's going down there. But the combination of his strength and his balance made him a truly great running back for the last 2 years for this team. And Kyle Hamilton, his resume speaks for itself. I think everybody nationally saw that play he made against Florida State. The second interception of the game in the opener this year. For those that didn't get to watch Notre Dame or don't watch Notre Dame on a regular basis the last 2 years, not to say that that was necessarily the norm, because that was ridiculous, but you got used to just when you try to describe, like, what is a football instinct? What does this mean when a guy has football instincts? I don't know. I think Ed Reed, I think Troy Polamalu from years past, Kyle Hamilton, in terms of college players, has exactly that of sniffing plays out on fourth down, knowing exactly where things are going. And I mean, this is a guy that, as a true freshman, he might not have technically started, but there were multiple game plans his freshman year that were designed solely around him and the importance of him. And yeah, he's, I don't want to say necessarily generational talents, but talents like that don't come around. Talents don't like that don't come around in the secondary at Notre Dame and very often. He's an all-timer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I hate like the cliches and stuff like that in regards to, being, the best safety prospect of all time and different things like that. But, I don't think you've seen a safety prospect since Sean Taylor in regards to, someone being as good as Kyle Hamilton. I think he's that special of a talent. And he's somewhat of a unicorn in regards to his talent level as well, being 6'4", 220. He's probably going to run a 4.4 if he runs the 40 at the combine. I don't know exactly how healthy his knee is right now. I'm sure it's close to 100%, but no, he's certainly in the Jalen Smith, Manti Te'o category when it comes to just being a great Notre Dame player. And I think he might even be a better athlete than Jalen Smith, but pre-injury, which was certainly saying a lot.
All right. We'll get to some of the comments and questions in the live chat, one being in which somebody in particular, and I'm sure a number of people, because I hear this from time to time, annoyed that my phone went off during the so my phone is connected to the soundboard, and if my phone is on in any way, people want it to be on silent. It is already on silent, but if it's on in any way, it's going to come through the soundboard because it's connected to the soundboard for the call-in shows. So I don't always feel comfortable having my phone completely off because of being connected to family. So anyway, it is off right now, but it is, believe me, it's always on silent. So it still hums through the soundboard regardless. The other thing is that I set you guys up for criticism asking about the Cincinnati game. I would not have asked about the Cincinnati game if it was 42-3. But one of the reasons we're here, people understand that if we just took the wins and losses as they are and didn't analyze them, then we wouldn't have much to talk about. So there is something to talk about there in regards to not making excuses, just what's the analysis of the game? Did the team get better? Was that a strong performance out of Notre Dame? Not a strong performance? There's something to be analyzed there. Those are not excuses. It's me asking Nathan and Nick about their take on the Cincinnati game and the two teams. So, of course, I'm sure you guys have heard this for the last 10 weeks in regards to the Cincinnati comparison and that you've made excuses and so forth. The Oklahoma State matchup, that team in particular, it is the Fiesta Bowl. It is a New Year's Six matchup. And so, Nick, in particular, you've commented that it's a good place to be if you can't get to the playoff. It is the place to be. But Oklahoma State in particular doesn't, I don't want to knock on the Cowboys here because we cover all of college football, and I may have some folks watching that like Oklahoma State, but it doesn't generally excite college football nation with Oklahoma State being the other, for people that aren't just interested in watching the football that's played for those 3.5 hours, but some kind of a brand name matchup.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like if you look at those helmet games. I'm looking behind your head there, Mark, and I see the Alabama one, I see a Tennessee one sticking out, I see a Notre Dame one. Like, throw some of those teams together, just look at the helmet, you know it's a big time game. Is that so much what you think when you think Oklahoma State? They definitely have had their history. I mean, it's have a couple. I mean, good luck finding any program that had the back-to-back running backs quite like they did there in the late '80s with Barry Sanders into Thurman Thomas, quarterback Mike Gundy for those teams, by the way. But yeah, it's not necessarily like you look at the Big 12, Oklahoma, Texas draws the attention, not necessarily Oklahoma State always nationally. That's not to say it's not a knock on Oklahoma State here. Oklahoma State is a lot of the old parts that you look at with this Big 12 of, okay, just score 60 points and whoever is the first to 60 is going to win. They have been, them and Baylor have kind of been the teams that have been ahead of this turn a bit of, all right, we're going to focus on the defense. We're going to focus on innovating things, changing things up, and shutting you down, keeping you from scoring. And we'll figure out points on our own eventually. But as long as we keep you from scoring, then we have a great chance to win. And that's kind of how they've gone about this. And it's going to be as good a defense as Notre Dame faces all year long in this Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, Oklahoma State kind of reminds me of Texas A&M in the SEC, and look what Texas A&M did this year on the recruiting trail. I don't want to say they're necessarily like a sleeping giant per se, but I do think that they're a program that is sort of on the rise. Mike Gundy, I think, has been up for some other big-time jobs. There were even rumors that he was possibly up for some big-time jobs this year and almost left. So I think that's especially now with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12. I mean, Oklahoma State could, and Baylor, like you mentioned, Nick, could sort of run that conference for a long time. I mean, Cincinnati coming in, I think will help it as well. And they'll probably be a really good Power 5 program, especially if someone like Luke Fickell kind of sticks around for a couple more years. The other, I think, intriguing part about this, at least from a Notre Dame fan standpoint, is Notre Dame's never played Oklahoma State. They've pretty much played everybody, at least that you can think of. And this is certainly one of those, quote unquote, bigger name programs that they have not played. So I think that's intriguing. And I think for college football fans like yourself, Mark, that's something that they could look to. It's just, you've never seen it before. So that certainly brings some intrigue as well.
Yeah, and it's just not, I mean, you look at the Big 12 as it's currently constructed, it's just not a conference Notre Dame has a whole lot of history with. I mean, you look back to the roots of Notre Dame and what made Notre Dame into a national power. There's ties to what's the Pac-12 now, obviously, with the early days of Stanford and USC. Now the Stanford rivalry went on hold for a long time, but started back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there's that huge part of it. Obviously, the Notre Dame and the Big Ten, those stories are well documented of trying to get into the conference for years and years, and the rivalries with Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, and interstate there. The SEC, maybe it doesn't run quite as deep historically, but I mean, you look at the Big 12, and there's been some meetings with Notre Dame and Texas, say, in bowl games. There's been a couple of home and home series with Texas and Oklahoma here or there, but really there just is no real history with Notre Dame and deep in the Big 12, at least as it's currently constructed. And you kind of look at that and say, all right, this is unique. This is different. Because when Notre Dame's gone out there before, all right, once they played Colorado, once they've played Oregon State out of the Pac-12 and that blowout, that route that Chad Johnson and TJ Houshmandzadeh and company put on Notre Dame in 2000. And then they've played Ohio State a couple of times. So it's really just, you look at that and it's a chance to see something a bit different, in a different kind of form of football, and a different conference of football that Notre Dame fans don't get to see a whole heck of a lot of.
Yeah, those Colorado matchups in the late 80s into 1990 were monumental. And, of course, the Buffs have moved on to the Pac-12. There was a series with Texas that you guys could document pretty well, about 7 or 8 years ago, that were exciting in regards to, again, a couple national brands getting together. The games were exciting. The one at Texas, at Austin in particular, that people got excited about early in the season, and then the teams didn't, Texas in particular, did not turn out to be much of a team when it was all said and done. So it was a lot of hype for not much payoff at the end of the year. And of course, Notre Dame won a national championship when they beat Texas and Earl Campbell in the Cotton Bowl in 1977. And I can't think of too many Notre Dame-Oklahoma matchups through the years.
2012 is kind of like the biggest one of recent memory, when that kind of catapulted Notre Dame to face Alabama in the championship game. And what was
30 to 13 comes to mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
31-13, I think it was what it was. It was close throughout, and then kind of Notre Dame took off in like the fourth quarter.
And then really at Terry Hanratty, when he took over for Frank Leahy, his high point was beating Oklahoma and ending their streak in what was 1950, sometime in the 50s, very early on. And other than that, yeah, you're right, Mark. There's not a whole lot there of depth to a history with any of those.
Yeah,
and I don't even think there's anything on the horizon. Just looking at their future schedules, I mean, they have some, some stuff with the SEC, home and home with Texas A&M, Alabama coming up. Obviously, with their ACC ties now, I mean, they're going to play Clemson, Florida State, Miami on a consistent basis, but nothing really with the Big 12. So it really comes down to, I'm assuming they'll probably keep some sort of history now with Cincinnati. I don't even mean this in a negative way, but it seems like every Cincinnati coach that's any good comes to Notre Dame and over the in the coming years, and I think they might even snag a few more, or at least one more possibly. After the Fiesta Bowl and the college football playoff. I mean, there's certainly some holes on Notre Dame's coaching staff right now that Cincinnati could fill. And there's been some rumors around that. So, and with Cincinnati going to the Big 12, I could see that being some, a program they try to, keep involved with now that they sort of have like a rivalry of sorts.
True. Michael is saying the playoff should have been Baylor, Cincinnati, Michigan, and Notre Dame. I think Michael's possibly leaving out a conference. I don't know which one that is, but
probably purposefully.
Yeah. I think that's a point there from Michael taking a dig.
All right. So looking beyond the Fiesta Bowl into 2022, Notre Dame was able to retain, thanks to Marcus Freeman and his newly formed coaching staff, a pretty high-end recruiting class for 22 on National Signing Day. And then, Nathan, there was a commit that came in, speaking of safety play at a high level, at the high school level, Peyton Bowen.
So Peyton Bowen's actually committing, or he's announcing on January 1st.
Okay.
And I think he's down to Notre Dame, Alabama, Oklahoma, and USC. But it seems to be trending well for Notre Dame overall in that recruitment. They've done a really good job. They actually have offered two of his teammates in the 2023 cycle as well. Jackson Arnold, who's a quarterback who Notre Dame's heavily involved with as well, and Ryan Yates, another defensive back. But Peyton Bowen seems to be the first guy out of those three that's going to choose a school. And right now, my money would be on Notre Dame. He's a top 100 player, top 75 actually, and probably close to a borderline 5-star, and will continue to sort of trend up in the rankings. I think he's that talented of a player. And I think we were talking off air before we came on, and Nick mentioned that defensive back recruiting is trending in a way that's really good, because Notre Dame, I look at defensive line and linebacker play as big strengths, and not only on the field but in recruiting. You look at this year's class; they landed 4 out of the 16 Buckus Award finalists in the 2022 cycle. A 5-star in Jalen Sneed. In the 2023 class, they have a 5-star in Keon Keeley at defensive end that's already committed. So really, cornerback and safety recruiting is that next step to make this defense even better than what it's been over the last 5-6 years under Elko, Clark Lee, and now Freeman. And Peyton Bowen's another guy to bring in, and they have another kid in Adon Schuler, who's a top 200 player committed at safety for the 2023 cycle, and then a kid out of actually my backyard, Justin Rhett, who goes to Bishop Gorman, a corner committed right now to Notre Dame. So if Bowen were to commit, they would be 3 guys in that top 150 or so, and trending towards a really, really special class in the defensive backfield.
Yeah, it's huge there. You'd like, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you see it on the offensive line a lot. You see it at the tight end position a lot. You'd like some of that to carry over to the offensive side just a little bit more than it has. Not to say, I mean, you look at this past recruiting class that comes in, and Tobias Merriweather, he ends up being the only receiver in this class, for instance. And now he's a solid receiver force, solid 4-star across pretty much every site there. Arguably a top 100 player nationally. He's the one that had the will always go down as a trivia answer of which recruit's house was Brian Kelly at when the LSU news broke, and whose barbecue was he eating, and that was Mr. Merriweather's barbecue that he ate. And some funny comments have been posted from Merriweather's father about take your damn barbecue and get out of here and stop lying to me and whatever else about Brian Kelly. But yeah, you look at the offensive side of the ball there, and not to say there haven't been playmakers. I think Michael Mayer obviously qualifies as a playmaker. I think you look at it, Kyron Williams, who we just spent a good amount of time praising, he qualifies as a playmaker. But in terms of the depth, in terms of, it's almost like baseball prospects. When you evaluate minor league rosters and minor league depth charts of, okay, well, they have X top 100 players or X top 150 players. Not all those are a guarantee to hit. Same thing in recruiting. Just because a guy's ranked in the top 100 or 150 or 300, whatever it might be, doesn't mean it's a guarantee to hit. Doesn't mean this guy is going to be a guaranteed star at that level. But you accumulate more and more and more, and you're bound to hit on more and more and more as well. It's as simple as that. And Notre Dame just it hasn't been that same way offensively outside of the offensive line and really the tight end position compared to other positions there offensively. And that's where I'd like to see this, where I'm excited to with Marcus Freeman and what he said about recruiting and how every assistant's going to have to be front and forward about recruiting the offense, specifically the skill players on the offense, taking a step in their abilities once they get on campus, not just in terms of development. That's what gets me excited about what the future of this team.
And it kind of goes back to what I mentioned in regards to defensive back recruiting. I mean, linebacker, defensive line's been there, and defensive back recruiting was what was holding them back. I mean, outside of a couple guys. I mean, obviously we're just talking about how Kyle Hamilton's, a special talent, but they don't consistently land those guys. And like you mentioned, Nick, they don't have the depth to really accumulate injuries and guys not hitting. And on offense, I mean, obviously you have offensive line recruiting, which is probably the best in the country, if not, or very close to it. Tight ends there. In reality, I think running backs there as well. I mean, their running backs have been very good over the last few cycles, and I think it's getting even better on a consistent basis where they're bringing in, even two guys a lot of the cycles and they're hitting. But really it's going to come down to quarterback and wide receiver recruiting overall. And like you mentioned, Tobias Merriweather's the only wide receiver commit in the 2022 class. Regardless of how good he is, that's just not going to cut it. I mean, if everybody returns next year, they only have 8 scholarship wide receivers. And that's if a 6th year in Avery Davis returns, a 5th year guy in Joe Wilkins, who's coming off an ACL and hasn't been a prominent player for them, returns. And then guys like Kevin Austin, who, could probably, make himself some money this year in the draft if he were to leave. I'm not saying he'd be a 1st or 2nd round pick necessarily because he only has 1 year under his belt, but certainly a guy that can, he would probably end up a pretty good NFL player, even if it took him a few years to acclimate. So losing CJ Williams, I think specifically in the 2022 cycle really hurt, even though the class overall is great. And then, they have to, like you mentioned, 2023 and beyond, QB and wide receiver recruiting certainly have to be better, and they have to accumulate more depth.
And I've also got to think that the benefit of elite recruiting, in addition to what Nick touched upon, in that just the odds say that if you recruit 4 elite wide receivers, that 1 or 2 are going to be busts. That's fine. That's the way the game's played. You've got 2 top-end wide receivers, as opposed to recruiting 4 3-star wide receivers and hoping one of them comes through and plays above their heads, which may possibly happen, but then you've got 1 good player. But also the competition in regards to if you're at a level where you're recruiting, let's say, top 20 to 25 in the nation, you're recruiting at a level where probably most positional units you're bringing in 1 really highly touted player. And unless he gets pushed, it's only human nature that if he sees that he's the best wide receiver in the room by far, it's only human nature that he may go 80%, as opposed to there's 5 of us here that are top end, and I got to bust my tail and work hard to get playing time. And just the competition pays off from that standpoint, I would think.
I do think the portal is going to become a huge factor, and it already is becoming a huge factor in college football. So certainly One thing you don't want to do, and I actually reference this for Notre Dame basketball recruiting a lot of the times because they had a few whiffs here and there over the last few years, and then you bring in portal guys to essentially make up for your recruiting misses. That's where I think the portal is misused in college football and college basketball. I mean, obviously sometimes you're going to miss and you bring in a portal guy and that helps, but really what portal guys should do is put you over the top versus trying to account for, recruiting misses. So for example, this year, if Tobias Merriweather is the only guy that they end up signing in 2022, when he's a senior, you either got to have a lot of freshmen and sophomores and juniors contributing that are also really good, or you have to have a few portal guys that you've brought in over the years. And there's been some people that have made some good points that, next year Notre Dame's probably going to be fine at receiver if all those guys come back. They should have quality depth. They should have quality talent. But it's the years after that where Kevin Austin will be gone, Braden Lenzy will be gone, Joe Wilkins will be gone, Avery Davis will be gone. That's 4 guys that are out the door 100% next year, regardless if they play well or not. So going, as when Tobias Merriweather's a sophomore, as of right now at least, with no guys in the portal and nobody in the 2023 class that we can at least speak of as of now, you have 4 guys. And that's where I don't think portal guys should be 100% counted on. Because a lot of guys leave their programs because they're not getting playing time. And if you're Notre Dame, or do you really want to accept guys that are not getting playing time at other big programs, that could, speak to maybe their talent level and a recruiting miss on their end. So yeah, no, it's interesting, but the portal is going to be important. And I think moving forward, at least it can put you over the top if you recruit at a high level as well.
Yeah, you've seen it a little bit with Notre Dame, but the thing with Notre Dame that you have to remember is, as of now, and this maybe it does change going forward, but as of right now, in terms of people that they take in the transfer portal, it's got to be a student that's technically a graduate student. So it limits compared to when you look at what so many other programs are doing, what other colleges and universities are doing and letting in. They have a different set of rules that they have put in place in order for a player to transfer in, what they have to be going through. So it does limit them at that. Not to say that they haven't gotten benefits from it. Obviously, Jack Cohn is one of those. Nick McLeod comes to mind here in recent years of being one of those guys. And yeah, it's one of those that you look at though, and it's not one that they've been able to take advantage of, but it's certainly one that I think they're going to have to entertain here in the coming years. And I think the wide receiver is the number one spot that you're going to probably see that addressed, I would think, in this coming off season.
And I think with quarterback, you mentioned Jack Cohn. I think that's a good example of what I mentioned. And, Notre Dame hasn't whiffed on QBs. I mean, they brought in QBs, a couple guys that transferred out because they weren't getting playing time. A few guys have maybe not worked out as well as hoped. Jack Cohn, I wouldn't say put him over the top this year because obviously they're not playing for a national championship. I don't think Jack Cohn's necessarily a national championship winning quarterback, but he certainly stabilized the program. This year with Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner as your full-time starter all year, you probably don't finish 11-1. So Jack Cohn being there, I think, is a good example of what the portal can bring to a school like Notre Dame, whether it's a grad transfer or not. Like you mentioned, Nick, I mean, it's going to be usually grad transfers, but they've certainly had a few non-grad transfers that have worked out. In Alohi Gilman a few years back out of Navy, Amir Carlisle, who came over from USC, is another good example. So that they can, but then again, it has to be from probably a pretty high academic school. You got to get your guys that transfer in from a Navy, from a USC, from a Vanderbilt, from a Duke that maybe show out as freshman or sophomore and can come in with the credits that Notre Dame's going to take in. But then again, I mean, it is, like you mentioned, a lot of grad transfers overall, which limits the pool for sure.
We've got Nick Shipkowski here from the USA Today platform for Notre Dame football, Fighting Irish Wire. So catch his work right there and the rest of the staff. Nathan Erbach from Golden Homers podcast. Also, Nathan does his work here at the Voice of College Football, knocking out postgame for us each and every Notre Dame game, along with Ben Belden. So join them right here on the main channel or over on the Notre Dame channel right after the Fiesta Bowl for Notre Dame postgame right here at the Voice of College Football. Don't forget to like this video. You can always share the link out on social media, whether that's on Twitter or on Facebook, and help spread the word that we're here each and every day talking college football with all of you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis of the game we all love because of all of you. And because of the traffic that we get on this channel, it's more of a national variety than what you guys encounter. Not that there aren't tons of fan bases taking shots at Notre Dame that you guys encounter on Twitter, of course, and elsewhere, but you're going to get a little bit more of the national take and a question that I answer probably every other week at least from somebody about Notre Dame joining a conference. I only give my perspective based on what I believe is good for the competition on the field. I'm not taking into consideration necessarily money, academics. I'm aware of those things. I'm not intimately aware to know the nuts and bolts to the nth degree, but I'm aware of the academic considerations. Obviously, the geography's there, the money's there, and I have an idea of what the reports on TV contracts and otherwise have been. But I talk strictly from a football perspective of what I think it would be of Notre Dame joining a conference and where that should be. So Nathan, give us the nuts and bolts of why Notre Dame doesn't join a conference, if they should join a conference, if this is likely, unlikely, and then we'll kick it to you, Nick.
Before I answer, is there any other program that gets that? I feel like every time I'm on, I have to answer this question for you too. Is there any other program that gets obviously not a join a conference question, but
BYU fans?
Does Texas get like the Texas is back every time you do a Texas
hammered with that? Yes. Yeah. Texas gets hammered for that. Georgia gets hammered with 1980. Miami gets hammered with you think you're elite. That was forever ago. There's a few easy, low-hanging fruit for certain programs. You also got a 1988 listed in here a couple times as well, so that comes down.
Yeah,
but
well, it should at least be 1993, but we can get into that another day.
Yes, I've defended 1993 on numerous occasions because that
Nathan's
would have been
like,
my
I was
vote as
barely
well.
born by then. I'm a youngster, but
Talk about head-to-head. There you go.
I mean,
Go ahead, Nick.
The thing that bothers me I shouldn't say. Not that I expect everyone to know the history of every college program and the inner workings of conferences and whatnot. But if you have a problem with Notre Dame not joining a conference, like, I know it's tough to get in your time machine and go back, but if you have a problem with it, then go complain to Fielding Yost at Michigan, because Notre Dame tried to join what was the Big Ten for years and years and years, was told not only they couldn't join what was the Western Conference at the time that turned into the Big Ten, but the teams from that conference were told not to schedule Notre Dame. So that's why you had Notre Dame taking on Army in Yankee Stadium. That's why you had Notre Dame jumping on a train and traveling cross country to start that rivalry with USC. That's why you had that part of it. And now that, not now, but in the years that followed, that Notre Dame turned into one of the true national programs in college football. Oh, well, come join the Big Ten. Why don't you join the Big Ten? Why the hell would I want to join the Big Ten? Well, you didn't want me back then. Went and self-made yourself is what Notre Dame ended up doing by getting creative, creating the USC rivalry, creating the Army rivalry for those years. And why would Notre Dame want to join the Big Ten? I look at it and it's, if you absolutely have to, I just don't see that situation right now, because there's people that are out there, and I've seen it a couple on the comments that have gone on, of the 12th game versus the 13th sample size. And it's like, okay, well, you want to compare the 13th sample size of playing Mercer or playing an FBS school or whatever it might be? Is that really that big of a difference? Do you want to take that into comparison? Because I look at that and I just don't see if you know the history of it whatsoever, it makes a heck of a lot more sense of why Notre Dame doesn't really have interest in joining a conference in anytime soon for football. And
I think what goes on now, I don't even know if they necessarily hold that against the Big Ten or anything like that anymore. They maybe do. I think in today's college football landscape, until teams say they're not going to schedule Notre Dame until they join a conference, which I don't think will happen, because they're such a name brand that people want to play them regardless if they're up or down or whatever. It's not a huge deal at this point. And then the other thing is, I think Notre Dame just likes to play their national schedule. I'm not saying it's the best schedule in the country. That's not the point I'm trying to make. But they love playing USC and Stanford every year. They love playing Navy every year. They love being able to go into NFL stadiums and do their Shamrock Series on a yearly basis. They like scheduling SEC teams. They like scheduling Big Ten teams. They like scheduling, they like having their ACC teams that they play on a yearly basis. So and then obviously the NBC contract, I think they enjoy it, but they also don't make as much money as they would in a conference with the NBC contract. So the idea that the money is kind of keeping them from, joining a conference is sort of an outdated, I guess, way of thinking. I think that used to be kind of part of it maybe 15, 20 years ago, before all these conferences had their own, TV contracts. But right now, Notre Dame probably makes less than most of the teams in Power 5 school, or most Power 5 programs do, from TV deals. But they're certainly watched on NBC, and I think that's proven on a yearly basis when you look at the numbers. When Notre Dame plays Clemson at home and it's an NBC, it's probably the most watched game of the year, and so on and so forth. And when they do play on ESPN or ABC or whatever network they end up playing on, it's typically has some of the higher ratings. So to me, it really goes back to just being able to schedule who they want to schedule, play where they want to play. And I really don't think, there's been some comments here about how we sound whiny and how Notre Dame fans want to complain about not making the college football playoff. I don't think myself or Nick have complained about not making the college football playoff.
Cincinnati. That's as simple as that. Show up with a game plan against Cincinnati and win that game, and you're in the playoff. It's really not. So
to me, it would be easier for Notre Dame to make the college football playoff if they joined a conference. And I'm okay with it not being easy. Win all your games or go 11-1 and see what happens. To me, that's all that matters. And I think there's a lot of times where Notre Dame will go 11-1 and they'll make it. Next year, if they go 11-1 and one of their losses is to Clemson or Ohio State, but they beat the other, they probably have a really good chance of making the college football playoff. If they go 12-0, they're certainly going to make the college football playoff. So to me, it's really like Notre Dame knows when they're going to make the college football playoff every year. If they go 12-0, they're going to make it.
Well,
just like any other Power 5 team. If they go 12-0, 13-0, they're going to make it. If Notre Dame goes 11-1, then they have a chance to make it just like anybody else that loses the game.
Yeah, to Nathan's point, it's not like you look at Notre Dame's future schedules here, and it's not like they're struggling right now to find big-time opponents. They start next year at Ohio State. They have Clemson on the schedule. USC's on there every year. USC, you would think with Lincoln Riley, that's going to have a boost and going to be a top 10, top 15 program, again, unlike it's been for the last decade or so. But you think that they're going to be back and be competing for Pac-12 and national titles here before too long, one would think. And then you look beyond that, the home scheduled with Texas A&M in coming years, Alabama in coming years. They're not struggling right now to find big-time programs to play. And until that changes, there's going to be no pressure whatsoever on Notre Dame to join a conference.
So I've got a lot of thoughts about this. Some are anti-Notre Dame, some are pro-Notre Dame. So first and foremost, Notre Dame has no responsibility to the rest of college football. Notre Dame needs to act in a way in which benefits Notre Dame. And until they are forced to do something or the conditions are made in such a way that make it difficult for them, why should they act? They're going to do what's best for them, and they should. I am going to admit to a bias as a guy that grew up as a college football fan in the Midwest in Big Ten country and watching Notre Dame play Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue every year. I got accustomed to that and always thought Notre Dame should be in the Big Ten. They're obviously geographically right in the middle of Big Ten country. And in terms of not just geographically, but in regards to the history of those series and just the style, the brand, the tradition, the decades long of football tradition seems to fit Big Ten culture from a football standpoint.
Yeah, for sure.
From an AC, to me, the ACC and Notre Dame from a football standpoint is a stretch. It's it just doesn't fit from a football standpoint. I've always defended Notre Dame's schedule because, to your point, both of you, Notre Dame has scheduled a national schedule that, of course, nobody can guarantee that they're going to play the toughest schedule in the nation every year, nor should they play the toughest schedule, but it's always a formidable schedule. And when you're scheduling USC and Virginia and Stanford, of course, and some of the other games that they're scheduling on a regular basis, that has veered off of the Michigan State, Purdue portion of that. But it's always a formidable schedule. So the complaints that most people have in College Football Nation against Notre Dame's schedule in recent years is not levied against other teams that play pretty weak schedules just because they're bound to a conference schedule. I do think that, to Nick's point, of course, USC and Stanford have not been very good in recent years. For Stanford, it's been quite a while. For USC, it's been a bit sporadic, but nowhere near what they were in the early part of the 2000 teens, 10 or 12 years ago. In addition to that, I think this contract with the ACC has watered down Notre Dame's schedule. When they're giving you a rotation of the Louisvilles and Dukes and Georgia Techs in place of Michigan State, Purdue in particular, that's going to diminish the schedule. But again, Notre Dame doesn't need to play a killer schedule. Their schedule, even in an off year, when they made the playoff in 2018, their schedule was knocked, but it was Florida State, Virginia Tech, USC, Stanford were down. Those are typically really good football programs that are going to field anywhere from 8-4 to 11-1 football teams most of the time. But on that particular year, and for recent years, they haven't, and that's not Notre Dame's issue.
Yeah,
so
my thoughts on the ACC. I never was a big fan of joining the ACC as like a part-time member or whatever you want to call it. I actually really enjoyed playing Michigan State, Purdue, even Michigan on a yearly basis. Part of it because those are traditional rivals, part of it because, like what you mentioned, I think the style of play fits Notre Dame a little bit better, at least in regards to, just like the eye, I guess the eye, like what's nice to the eye, if that makes any sense. I mean, Notre Dame certainly fits the bill of Big Ten football a little bit better. I do like playing Clemson and Florida State, and obviously Miami's been a Notre Dame rival as well. So, I mean, those are fun. I mean, Boston College, Pitt, kind of the same thing in that regard. So I don't know if I think it's maybe as bad as you do when it comes to the fit for Notre Dame overall. And I part of me does like having kind of like that set schedule on a yearly basis that a conference would sort of bring you. But yeah, I mean, and I think it was Mason, my good buddy Mason, who actually is part of the Golden Homers podcast with me, my co-host. He brought up with the expansion. I mean, it's going to even be less incentive for Notre Dame to join a conference because they're pretty much going to make it every year or close to it, at least with the way that they're playing right now. If that continues, I mean, if there's ever a 12-team playoff, I mean, Notre Dame's essentially going to be in, 90-95% of the time, unless they plummet. So I think it will even be less incentive for them to join a conference. And I do want to address one other thing before Nick, I know, goes. Someone mentioned that I said that if Notre Dame goes 12-0, they'll make the college football playoff every year. That's not really what I meant. I meant that most years they're going to make the college football playoff if they go 12-0. Certainly next year if they beat Ohio State and Clemson. I don't think that they would need a 13th data point to make the college football playoff over an undefeated Power 5 team. But in general, 12-0 Notre Dame will go 99% of the time because you're not going to see all Power 5 teams go undefeated or a team from all Power 5 conferences go undefeated most years. So a 12-0 Notre Dame team would go to the college football playoff the majority of the time. If I needed, I didn't realize I had to rephrase that for people.
Yeah, it's how many times do we sit here in the middle of September or early October and it's like, okay, well, these teams are clearly going to win out because they're ranked in the top 4 or top 5 right now. And every year we around the same part of the year. Okay, well, there's an upset. Here's an upset. Oh, Oregon just lost at Stanford, whatever it might be. Like, it seems like every year we have this conversation, and every year it ends up playing out that, okay, well, there's only 1 or 2 unbeatens at the end of the year. Sometimes there's a crazy third one. but even that's a reach more often than not.
I guess the year that it hit me, because I had always defended Notre Dame's schedule for all the people that said they got to join a conference. They got to join a conference. It's not fair. They're sitting at home when these other conference championship games are going on for a 13th data point. And I've always said, well, yeah, but if you look at the entirety of the schedule, their 12 games are difficult. They're typically in the top 10 or 20% of strength of schedules in the country. But in 2018, that undefeated Notre Dame team not playing a 13th data point, and Oklahoma and Ohio State were kind of stalemated at 12-1 as conference champions. And then especially considering what later happened, which none of us could have predicted in 2020 when Notre Dame joined the ACC for one season. But even sitting there in 2018, I thought Notre Dame could be playing Clemson right now in the ACC championship game if they would join the conference in all sports, and then that would solve this this 5-team issue here. But that's what it is.
And I think the other point I would make is I think every time Notre Dame's made the playoff, I feel like they deserved it. And I think every time they haven't made the playoff, I think that they deserve not to make it. So I think overall the committee's gotten it correct. I think almost every year in regards to allowing all teams in, they've gotten it correct. But in regards to Notre Dame, is that's the team we're talking about and covering right now. That I think Notre Dame, I don't think they've been slighted, nor have they been favored in any way when they've made it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's also, I mean, you look back to 2015, and if Notre Dame makes one stop against Stanford at the end of that game, they're probably in that college football playoff. Like they're right there. I don't think that there's this instant this need, I guess, for Notre Dame necessarily to just join it. I think that it's a fun conversation for a lot of outsiders with it, of people that maybe don't follow Notre Dame as closely. And okay, well, it'd be cool if Notre Dame was in the Big Ten. Yeah, it would be neat. Nationally, it would be neat to see Notre Dame join any conference. But in terms of what's in the best interest of the program, what's in the best interest of the university, it's being independent, and it's being what they are and what they've always been.
Mark, I have a question for you actually. Before I know people probably want us to move on from these as well, but what's your take on the FCS argument? I know D-Rock Irish, who's always in here, brought it up, and I've heard that argument before. But I'm curious on teams that play FCS opponents. There was actually I'd have to pull up the tweet, and it would take me a while, so I can't. But I can kind of remember it to an extent. Someone mentioned that Notre Dame played Toledo this year, and that's essentially an FCS opponent. And then I think it was actually Brian Driscoll, who's been on your show a few times. He put out the tweet, but like I said, it was a while back. I'd have to find it. He mentioned that the last 8 times or something like that Toledo has played an FCS opponent, they've won all of them, and then they've averaged those wins against good FCS opponents. If you look at those FCS opponents' records, I think one of them won the national title that year, or something like that. Their average margin of victory was 28 or 35 points or something like that. So comparing Toledo to an FCS opponent to me is ridiculous. It's an easy game most years. I mean, Notre Dame obviously struggled. But in general, I don't think Toledo or playing Navy or whoever should be compared to an FCS opponent. But I'm curious on what your take is in regards to the 13th data point when a lot of these teams play FCS opponents. Because I can see both sides. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I outlined a situation in which the 13th data point was taken as a conference championship game against a difficult opponent, just if you're taking them in order versus Notre Dame sitting on the couch. But of course, if you're taking the entirety of the season, yes, you're uncovering the Mercers and the Citadels and the Tennessee Chattanoogas on a lot of schedules that typically the Big Ten doesn't play too many of those. The SEC plays a pretty strong hand of those opponents, and others do as well. There is a decided difference between playing a top half of the MAC school or Sunbelt school versus taking on your typical FCS opponent. Yes. Are there FCS outliers that compete against some teams in major conferences? Have there been some FCS national championship caliber teams that have beaten Kansas State and Illinois and some teams, some lesser teams in the Big 12 and the Big 10? Yes.
We got to throw out Michigan there with that.
Those are outliers. What's that?
So we got to throw up, just because it's a Notre Dame thing.
There you go.
And Michigan.
That's the one right there. Yes, there are outliers. Everybody, just like when we were talking about recruiting, we can sit here and talk about the 2 stars like J.J. Watt that is going to be a Pro Football Hall of Famer. Yes, if we want to comb through the thousands and thousands of players to get the examples to support that. But there's no question that Notre Dame has no apologies to make for its strength of schedule. They are playing a 12th game instead of a 13th game that other teams are playing that get into the college football playoff, because we've never had a situation in which a team has not reached its conference one time, 2 times that a team has not reached its conference championship game, Ohio State in 16, Alabama in 17, and reached the college football playoff, but it's somewhat rare.
And I think on the other side of that, and this is why I said I can see both sides. I mean, playing a 13th game does, allow for an injury or whatever, a suspension because of, a targeting or whatever. So there are things in the 13th game where, Jamison Williams, I know that this wasn't against an FCS team, but when Jamison Williams had the targeting against Auburn, that completely changed that game. If that would have happened a week prior when they did play an FCS team, or I don't know if it was a week prior, but just as an example, and Williams missed the first half of Auburn or missed the first half of Georgia or so on and so forth, I think that certainly plays a role. And then obviously, or someone tears an ACL or gets a concussion and they miss big games. That's where I kind of agree with the 13th data point to an extent. But again, I was really just curious on your take, because I do think that there's an argument to be made when teams schedule, sometimes teams schedule 2 FCS opponents. I think Oklahoma State did that this year, actually. And so just an interesting one, because it's talked about a lot when it comes to Notre Dame and their lack of a 13th data point.
Yeah, I think that some people in the comments have it right there, that there's some FCS teams that can compete with even some Power 5 programs. I mean, you can't say that they can't compete with a Vanderbilt or can't compete with some of the bottom feeders in the Big Ten or even middle feeders in some of the other conferences. But it's just I think when you look at it, it's the week after week after week, who they play. It's not the same. And okay, for every Appalachian State that there was for Michigan, how many more blowouts and 49-0, 56-0 wins are there the other way on those? So I think that plays a huge part in it as well.
And when you're considering the caliber of teams that we're talking about programs and teams that are competing for college football playoff appearances and the strength of their schedules. Is there really a difference in taking on an FCS opponent and taking on one of the 10 worst FBS teams in the country? If you're going to displace Mercer and put in UTEP or Georgia Southern or Georgia State, does that really matter just because they've got a FBS label on them?
Yeah, probably not.
All right, folks. We appreciate everybody being here to talk Notre Dame football. Of course, the Irish take on Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl, and Nathan will be hosting our post game right here at the Voice of College Football. So you can catch that right here on the main channel, or over on the Notre Dame channel, which we would hope that you would subscribe to. We want to hit that 1,000 subscriber mark. That helps with the algorithm. So whether you enjoy Notre Dame football or not, you just want to see us continue to grow the various channels, please head on over to the Notre Dame channel and subscribe right there. Please join Nick with his work at, I'll pull up the banner right here, at Fighting Irish Wire on the USA Today platform. Is there an easiest way to get there and navigate that, Nick?
FightingIrishWire.com is the best place to go. It's simple as that. All the main stories are right there at the front.
Absolutely. Nathan, what do you have working lately?
I'm actually recording tonight. Like I said, Mason's been in this chat kind of doing his defending, I guess, on in the comments. But recording tonight with Mason. One thing that we're doing more and more now is on a weekly basis, we like to hold the spaces on Twitter as well. So all of you that are in here, certainly come join us there. We can take your comments and different things like that. And it's kind of a fun way to interact with fans. So, but we're going to be previewing the Oklahoma State Notre Dame game. We always talk recruiting because that's kind of our MO as well. And then we'll go from there. But excited about what the podcast has become over the last few months.
Absolutely. And again, Fiesta Bowl post game right here at the Voice of College Football with Nathan and Ben Belden immediately following the game. Guys, we appreciate you being here to talk Notre Dame.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite.